Hey, it's Gerald from Lakers Fast Break. Anchor is the easiest way to make your next podcast. It's absolutely free, and their creation tools will allow you to record and edit your show right from your phone or your home computer. Anchor will then distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on great podcast outlets like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Radio Public, Google Podcasts, and many more. You can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. So download the free Anchor app today or go to anchor.fm to get started on your next podcast. All right, and we're back for another episode of the Lakers Fast Break podcast. It's Gerald Glassford coming right back at you here from Lakers Fast Break, Pop Culture Cosmos, Game Source, and Inside Sports Fantasy Football. We appreciate everyone out there listening to all of our great shows. And if you get a chance after you listen to this program, I'm telling you, if you are an aficionado or someone who really loves the NBA Draft, I don't want to say NBA Draft Junkies yet because I will be here in a second, but an NBA Draft aficionado or someone who really follows it, you need to check out all of our great podcasts that are still viable, still full of great content that's fresh, that you can hear and is still relevant today over on our Lakers Fast Break channel, on Podbean, on the Anchor app as well, or anywhere you get your podcast, because you'll be listening to over, I think, 12, 13 different NBA Draft podcasts that are there, specifically focused on the NBA Draft, so I hope you get a chance to check that out today. But also, we're going to be talking to NBA Draft because our countdown continues right here at the Lakers Fast Break. We're up to the top 10 shooting guards headed for the NBA Draft. And you know him as the man behind the great site, NBADraftJunkies.com. You got to check it out today. All the great stuff, not only his mock draft, but his profiles and everything there. And then while you're at it, go to YouTube, NBA Draft Junkies channel there, subscribe, like his videos, check out all the great breakdowns of both some of the good and some of the not so good things about this year's draft prospects here at the NBA Draft Junkies YouTube channel. It is a good man indeed, Mr. Rafael Barlowe. And Rafael, thanks for coming back.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be a guest on your show and to talk basketball and NBA draft, stuff that I love. So I feel like I should be thanking you for this opportunity.
No, it's always great talking to you, my friend. I just love it. I know that our conversations have gotten pretty in-depth overall in the draft, and it's still, even with all the conversations we have, there's still so much more to talk about, and that's what I love about this time of the year, this kind of uncertainty that we have, even more so, obviously, because the unfortunate incidents going on with the pandemic and all that, but there's still all this type of uncertainty that you have as far as trying to project all these NBA prospects that are coming out there, or the ones that are currently enrolled into the NBA draft. So we're focusing today on the shooting guards, and we left the guards specifically for last, meaning the shooting and the point guards, because as you know, this is now more than ever a guard-driven league here in the NBA.
Yeah, it's, the game has just changed so much. I can't really tell you the exact year that I thought it changed. I guess you can say maybe the Warriors' first championship year. But ever since then, it's just, the game has just changed. It's a guard league. And then I also feel like, and we've talked about it before, but I feel like guys that are more so scorers than complementary players are losing their value, while guys that have a certain role that they can fill as just 3-and-D guys are becoming more and more valuable. And so for a lot of the guys that are in this shooting guard list could be some of the guys that I think that are really good scorers and isolation scorers. They're low on this draft list, or at least low on my list, not because they can't play, it's just because of fit. So even as like a person that analyzes the draft, you have to adjust your rankings based off of today's game as opposed to the player's actual game, which is kind of different.
It is, and I'm glad you're able to go ahead and, for lack of a better term, roll with the punches what the NBA has been delivering as far as how that has changed over the course of the past even decade. And like you said, I agree with you that the Warriors' success was pretty much the impetus to go ahead and change as a whole and evolve as a whole. I mean, there were some signs, obviously, you and I could tell after, I think, the Lakers championship, which had more of a different traditional style offense. Obviously, Phil Jackson was using the triangle then, and then it evolved into what the Miami situation where they won, but it was still more reliant on LeBron. But you saw with Dwayne Wade and the way he was playing, he was still a vital part of that. And Chris Bosh playing as an undersized center also maybe kind of leaned it towards that direction. But you're right. It started to, I think, evolve a little bit there, but we really saw it during the context of when the Golden State Warriors became the premier basketball team in the NBA.
I agree. And I guess if you really look back at it, the Oklahoma City Thunder, when they added Kendrick Perkins, that was specifically for the Lakers. Stop, because you couldn't get out the West if you couldn't stop Bynum and Gasol down low. And so, and then once they made it to the finals that year, Perkins was a liability against the Heat because they didn't have a post player for him to guard, and they played small and shot threes. And I remember specifically that series, him getting back on defense and going straight to the paint while Battier or Bosh, whoever was playing the five,
they're just going to the corner,
and he was left in no man's land. So that could have been like one of the first signs, I agree. And then Golden State just kind of took it to another level when they finished games with their small ball lineup with Draymond at the five. And it's just changed scouting. And but that's what I love about basketball, because it's a copycat league and it evolves. I do think eventually the bigs may come back. But as of right now, if you're a specialist, if you can knock down shots, then you may have more value than a guy that's a one-on-one isolation player, which wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago.
And that's something we would have to wait and see, because if a Shaquille O'Neal ends up getting drafted, or a Shaquille O'Neal's similar type body type and skill, I mean, you're going to utilize him no matter what type of NBA. I mean, there are transcendent players throughout time that would excel at any point in time in the league. I think, like you said, that centers could become more of a viability at some point down the road, but it's going to take that right center. And I don't think we see that at this point in time.
Yeah, even with Shaquille, I think he would still be as dominant, maybe a little bit more dominant offensively.
But he'd be playing at smaller guys.
Yeah. But I wonder on the defensive end, how many teams would just say, okay, we'll just trade 2 for 3 all night. We'll put a guy like, I don't know, a Ryan Anderson who's not playing anymore. Or at least I don't think he.
Not in the league, but I think he's playing overseas.
Yeah. But a guy like Ryan Anderson or a Channing Frye type player who they may just say, we'll just trade 2 for 3 all night. Shaq, you can get your 2 points. Maybe we'll foul you, but we're going to put you in a pick and roll situation, and we'll dare you to go out on the perimeter. So it would be definitely like a game of cat and mouse and strategy. And I wish it was something that we could see. But unfortunately, we don't have anybody that's as dominant as Shaq in the league today. But I think it'd be interesting to see if, like Philadelphia, if a healthy Embiid could ever make a deep playoff run, and see how teams would strategize against defending him and making him play defense.
That Orlando team in 2009 that the Lakers beat, that's a team I think that could have been like a model for what was to come. I just don't think the Orlando shooters, for the most part, were good enough at that point in time to go ahead and really be effective enough to go ahead and surpass the Lakers. Obviously they weren't, But I think that was kind of like the model you wanted to have going forward in today's NBA.
Yeah, I mean, they were big. I mean, they had a big front line. I mean, I think they may have went like 6'10", 6'10", and however tall Dwight is, depending on who you ask. I've seen 6'9" and 6'11". And, yeah, they ran like a 4 out, 1 in. Or even you can say if Dwight would have accepted the role as just a role man instead of wanting post touches, like he's accepted this year with the Lakers, how different would that Orlando team have been or so on. I still believe Dwight could be a dominant player in this league. It's just a matter of him. If he plays like he played this year for the Lakers, I think he could be again. But we're getting way off.
I know. And I talked about this actually with Laker Tom the other day from Lakerholics.net about Dwight Howard. I don't think he's going to stay. I know there's an article out that has him saying it would be a mistake for him to leave the Lakers. But I think him, like you said, if he's found this newfound acceptance of pick and roll, that Golden State or another team similar to that would be dying to have him as their starting center. And I think that for him, in fact, with a protracted salary cap, would be too good to pass up.
Yeah. It's just a matter of believing if he'll accept it. I don't know. It's something about the Lakers. They've gotten guys they've been able to maximize what they're getting out of like JaVale and Dwight and paying them a little bit of nothing.
Yeah, but I think it's based off the player. If you have the ultimate respect for LeBron, I think also Curry demands that kind of respect. I think there's very few players, like you said, that can get someone like Howard to go ahead and comply. And I think there's that small list, and whether it's the Warriors, whether it's the Lakers. But you're right. We're getting off a little off base here, but I'll tell you what, that's something to think about, the way the NBA is ever evolving. And shooting guards are still, depending on who you talk to throughout history, still a major part of that equation. And to have the right type of shooting guard that can go ahead and play that perimeter defense, be able to switch off, and also be able to shoot effectively is something that's very desired amongst the NBA, even to this day. We're signaling the ref for a quick timeout, but we'll be back with more of the Lakers Fast Break podcast. Check out what's been going on with the Pop Culture Cosmos Show and the PCC Multiverse.
I see the potential for basically like another Netflix kind of paradigm shift where here comes this other major player. They have a ton of resources. Apple could change the way that entertainment is consumed.
They say it's the only time this year that you'll have stars from each brand battling each other, and we know it's not going to be the case, but they like to say that, and more power to them, I guess.
Well, it's a big first step, bringing all those superheroes together. There were definitely some parts of the movie that I really enjoyed, and then there were some parts that I thought just kind of fell short of expectation.
Part of it has to be something to do with how it's being promoted, and this is a thing where audiences do not agree with critics.
That's the Pop Culture Cosmos Show.
And the PCC Multiverse, every week on Apple Podcasts.
And over a dozen of your favorite streaming and podcasting options. So let's go ahead and get into our countdown. We're already a few minutes in, so I appreciate you taking the time to speak to me today, Rafael, on the top 10 shooting guards in the NBA draft. So let's head off our list with number 10 for your list of the top 10 shooting guards coming to the NBA draft. Now, that's as of now, in case anybody decides to go ahead and go back to school or go back to Europe or whatnot. But, yeah, I think we should start with a good number 10.
All right, yeah, so number 10 is a guy, very interesting prospect. He's a guy that I would definitely take a flyer on. I would love to see him develop. He could swing between the 2 and the 3, but since he didn't make my list of 3s, I'll put him as the 2. Derek Austin out of Boise State. He's 6'9". He's really, really skinny, but he's skilled. He's more of a scorer than a shooter, but you don't see too many guys at that size that can handle the ball and make some of the plays that he makes. He's definitely under the radar. Like I say, he could be a project just because he'd have to make sure that his game fits and complements another star. But he's a guy that I could also see playing in the G League and putting up major numbers. but then still having a hard time finding a role. But again, he shot, respectable about 33% from three. And he rebounds. He can pass a little bit. He's skilled. He's a guy that I would take. So I have him at number 10 on my list.
So that's number 10 on your list. And one thing I wanted to ask you, because you said he's got great height, and I was reading up on that at 6'9".
Mm-hmm.
You said he's a project baby developing whatnot, and he also needs the right complementary player for him. What about on the defensive end? Does he use that height to his advantage against other shooting guards, which will, on most nights, be a lot smaller than maybe 2, 3, 4 inches smaller than what he's going to be playing up against? Does he use that height advantage effectively?
No, that's an area that I think he definitely needs to improve on. Even if you just look at his raw stats, he didn't get a lot of steals. He averaged less than a steal a game, less than a block a game. So I think that's the area that he would definitely need to improve on. If he was like an intense defender, I think he would be higher on a lot of draft boards. But it's just his skill set and his baseline of skills is what I'm banking on.
All right. Well, that's, again, a good effective player right there at number 10 that could develop into something. I think, like you said, if he stays at shooting guard, I think he has a better chance to play in the league. And I know he was not, or he just missed your list of small forwards. So I think if that's the case, I think better for him to go ahead and hopefully have a long-term career. I think it would have to be at the shooting guard to be more effective.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the way the NBA is gone positionless, the right fit, the right team, and a couple changes to his game, he could swing between 2 through 4. And I think a team would love that type of versatility. But it's just a matter of him making a couple of tweaks and adjustments or in the right fit. And like I said, he's a guy that I could see carving out a career as a role player, or I wouldn't be surprised if he's a guy that dominates the G League, struggles finding fit in the NBA, and then ends up having a successful career overseas, whether it's in Europe or China, as a professional scorer, as a guy that just puts up a lot of points in those type of leagues.
So who do you have at number 9? Number 9, as far as the top 10 shooting guards headed to the NBA draft.
Number 9 is a guy that could also swing between the 2 and the 3. It's Cassius Stanley from Duke. I never really thought of him as a one-and-done prospect, coming into this year.
Are you thinking he may go back?
I'm not sure at this point. Honestly, I probably wouldn't go back simply because you don't know if there's going to be a college basketball season. I would predict there will be an NBA season before college basketball season just because, at least everything that I've seen, they don't even think students will be on campus in August. So yeah. It's a really weird time. But, for him at the minimum, I would at least test the waters. And I think he had a good enough year. He has what you can't teach. He's a freak athlete. He shot well from 3. And I think that he's a guy that I think his age may play a little role. If I'm not mistaken, he's a little bit older than a lot of the other players in his class. But he's a guy that –
And you and I always know that being older is not better for the NBA draft.
Definitely, which is – I get it. You want a guy who's as far away from his prime as possible in some cases. But I think in other cases, you may want a guy that's older that can contribute right away. So it just matters of acquired taste. But, yeah, Cassius Stanley is a guy that, he was efficient this year from the floor. He's, like I said, a freak athlete. He's actually a pretty decent shot blocker for a wing. And in our, open court team that's going to get up and down and run, he's a guy that I think would thrive and excel just running the lanes and in open court. And if he can just develop a more consistent shot as a corner 3 guy, I could definitely see him being like a 3-and-D athletic wing that just knows his role and carves out a long NBA career.
And that's something that has to be developed. It's something that it should be for any player outside of a dominant center. Like you said, at least a short corner 3 has to be something you developed. It can be developed, rather easily because it's not that far of a shot.
Right. Yeah, I think sometimes it's just a matter of accepting the role of not being able to have the ball in your hands all the time, and your main role is just to sit there and wait for someone to pass you the ball, and you don't have a lot of freedom. So I think some guys struggle with that. But if you can make that adjustment, I believe you can have a long career because, I mean, look at Trevor Ariza. Trevor Ariza probably doesn't dribble more than twice anytime he has the ball. But he has to be on that. I think he's in the same class as LeBron, well, high school class as LeBron. So he might be on year 15 or 16. And he's made a lot of money, and he's played on championship teams, but he's a guy that has just accepted his role and maximized or mastered his role. And I think he's a guy that should be an example for a lot of guys who are athletic, who come into the league as athletes, may not have the reputation as being great shooters, but if you developed, you can always complement any star. And that's what Ariza has done.
Absolutely on that one. I thank him for his great efforts, especially in that pivotal game in Orlando. Speaking of Orlando, going back to Orlando, that and Dwight Howard, unfortunately, not remembering how to shoot a free throw. Thank you very much, by the way, Dwight. And unfortunately, the Lakers decided not to keep him next year and instead got Ron Artest or Meta World Peace, and that worked out as well. So, yeah.
For both sides. I think because Ariza hadn't really made a lot of money at that point, and because there's no state tax in Houston, he probably netted like $5 million more than Artest just over the length of their contracts, just off of saving with no state tax alone. So it was a win for both sides.
It was a win for both sides. And, of course, as Laker fans, we remember it fondly on both occasions. So I will go ahead and say that it's something that these players have to master. If you cannot master at the top of the key, if you cannot master on the sides, you at least have to go ahead and do the short corner. At least if you can hit 35 to 40% of your shots from the corner, you're going to be a valuable player in this league.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's like you said, it's something that can be worked on. I guess from my experience as a trainer, and you may remember the name, he had a short cup of coffee with the Lakers, but Chris Douglas Roberts, he was in camp with the Lakers, I want to say 2012, and he had just got cut. And, I was working for the Texas Legends at the time, and he mentioned to me, just kind of off the subject, he's like, well, what do you think I need to work on? I mean, I'm better than a lot of these guys. And one of the comments I made to him was, I said, I don't know if you compliment Kobe. I said, I know you're used to having the ball in your hands and, you like to dribble and dance around with the ball, and everyone knows you can score, but it's just a matter of, can you compliment Kobe? And so he gave me and my brother an opportunity to train him the following summer. And all we did was shoot threes. He made 300 or 400 threes 5 days a week. And he ended up getting back in the league and playing with Charlotte. But his role in Charlotte was to knock down corner threes. And I want to say he made about 38% of threes that year. He made more threes in his first month back than he had made his whole career before. And he ended up getting a couple contracts before he just decided to retire from basketball. But I feel like there's a lot of guys that could just make the same adjustment. Just stand in that corner, 300-400 threes a day all summer long, and it can extend your career.
It can. And I just think it's you have to go ahead, and I know this is a very loose analogy, but go ahead. It's like poor free throwers not accepting the fact that the granny style, they could probably improve their free throw percentage literally 10, 20, 30% in some cases. Because obviously whatever they're doing at the free throw line isn't working right now. But it's acceptable. This is not manly, or this is just not a good look for me. It's embarrassing. Well, going to the short corner, some of these players, I would imagine it's like almost like an ego hit. Okay, go sit in the corner and wait for the ball. And for, like you said, a lot of these players, all their careers have had the ball in their hand, and they're so used to a certain style of playing. Now you're telling them to go ahead and PJ Tucker over to the side. Yet PJ Tucker, look at his career. Look how much money he's made. Look at what he's done. because he went and decided to go ahead and commit to something in the corner. It's not, people just got to understand that it's such an analytical and statistical and data-driven world right now that that's where, in a lot of cases, it's most advantageous for you to lengthen your career. But you see, like you said, a lot of these players are not actually committing to that because of whatever reasons. They don't want to do what's best for their careers ultimately. They just want to go ahead and stick to what they know.
Yeah, and it's definitely an adjustment because I've been in a lot of gyms over the summers and worked with different trainers, and most guys are training as if they're going to have the ball in their hands all summer. Most guys are training as if they're going to have the same role as a James Harden, a Steph Curry, or a guy that's going to have the ball. So you're working on your one-on-one moves, spin moves, Euro steps, so on and so on. And I'm not against that, but I think you have to understand your role in the NBA and who's on your team. If you play with James Harden, you know you're not going to have the ball in your hands unless you're Russell Westbrook. If you play with LeBron, you know LeBron is not going to play off the ball. So you have to find a way to make sure that you can stay on the court with him. If you master knocking down shots and you play with LeBron, he's going to get you open looks and he's going to make you a lot of money. So, it's just one of those things where I think everyone should at least put up 200 to 300 catch and shoot threes every summer at the minimum, even if you play with the ball in your hands a lot. And if you don't, 400 or 500.
Like you said, it's now, it's 3 for 2, as you said earlier in the podcast, and it's 3 for 2. And if you don't understand that you need to go ahead and develop that outside, then you're going to be left behind. And that's going to be a shame for a waste of your talents and what could have been a long NBA career, because you're going to find yourself out of the league faster rather than go ahead and stay in there much longer. So, It was one of those things. So right now we're going to go ahead into number 8 on your countdown for the top 10 shooting guards headed to the NBA draft.
Number 8, I have CJ Ellaby out of Washington State. He's a guy that I probably had a little higher on this list coming into the season. He didn't shoot the ball as well in his sophomore year as he did his freshman year, but I'm going to just take a gamble and say that was a one-year thing. He really didn't shoot the ball well at all this year. He shot below 40% from the field and only about 34% from three compared to the 41% that he shot his freshman year. But what I like about him is he's a wing, but he rebounds like a big. He averaged nearly 8 rebounds a game. He gets a couple steals a game. And I'm a believer in his shooting. I just think that he had an off year, but he's a guy that I would like. Even if I'm the Lakers, he's a guy that I would love to have because I believe that I'm buying stock in him as a shooter. He shot over 80% from the free throw line. And if you're one of those people that believes free throw shooting is a good indication of how you develop as a three-point shooter, I'm buying stock into CJ Ellaby.
And that's something as well people have to look at. It's like you said, the statistics have bared out that somebody who's shooting well free throw-wise more than likely can develop that shot from the three-point range to an adequate level. Also, as well, the steals from a defensive standpoint. I know John Hollinger was on Chad Ford's podcast again the other day and noted that steals, unless you're on a college team or a EuroLeague team that full court presses all the time, steals is an indicator to them, GMs or people that look at analyze data and whatnot, that steals is often an indicator of the defensive ability of a certain individual.
I agree to a certain extent, but then you may have guys that gamble all the time in the passing lanes, and they may get 2 steals a game gambling, but they may give up 8 points. But then there are guys who, if they get their steals because they have excellent hands like a Ron Artest, then I think that's where it may translate a little more. But I do think steals and blocks, I think there are some guys that can pad their stats, like guys that they only chase blocks on the defensive end of the floor, so they're out of position, or they just stay close to the rim so they can try to block shots and they give up mid-range jumpers or uncontested jumpers. I do think in some ways steals and blocks can be empty stats, but I guess you have to watch the film and look at the stats as opposed to just looking at the numbers and not watching the film, because I think Allen Iverson, for example, was a guy that
got a lot of steals,
but he gambled in the passing lanes. But he also had Mutombo behind him for
Rondo.
a while. So, yep.
But Rondo, in his heyday, was a good on-ball defender.
Yeah.
But later on, as he got older, which we are very familiar with now on the Lakers, just gambles on steals a lot and doesn't stick to on defense. So you're right. That could be an indicator. But I found it interesting that he said that on a recent Chad Ford podcast, that steals were an indicator for him when he was working in the front office for the Memphis Grizzlies. That was an indicator as far as defensive alignment is concerned. But again, ultimately, the tape and the videos is that dictates virtually everything. You got to see where in context it lies and all that. So,
yep, I agree 100%.
So number 7, we're down to number 7 on your list of the top 10 shooting guards in the NBA draft. Who do you got at lucky number 7?
Number 7, I have Elijah Hughes out of Syracuse. I think he fits more so of the mold as a scorer than a shooter. He's also 22. So as we mentioned earlier, we know how people feel about 22-year-olds, but he had a good year. Averaged about 19 points a game. Shot around the mid-30s from 3. He's a pretty decent passer, 6'6". He's kind of more so the traditional 90s shooting guard style player. But he's the guy that if he could be one of the players that we talked about that really develops and, a corner 3 becomes a more consistent outside shooter from 3, I think it will open up the scoring ability that he has. So I'm a believer in it. I think that that's something that he can do. He's a good free throw shooter, so I think that he can knock down open threes and complement other guys. So that's why I have Elijah Hughes at number 7.
Does it concern you at all? Like you said, he's a good free throw shooter, but does it concern you at all if he's in the 30s at the three-point lane now, which is, I'm putting in context, three-point area is in college a little bit shorter than the NBA three-point line. So that always concerns me. I mean, we talked in the past about other players who shot well from the three-point lane in college. That, to me, I think translates a little better because, to me, it's about statistical and averages and the distance from the basket, if that's the case. I mean, if you're shooting in the 30% range or 35% range now, does that translate into the low 30s from an NBA standpoint?
Well, I think you also have to pay attention to the shots. And that's why I think the film is so much more important, because even if you look at the NBA, for example, and if I'm not mistaken, Lonzo Ball shot a higher percentage from 3 than Luka Doncic.
Yeah, he was at 40 at UCLA. He was in the 40s.
Right. But in the NBA, Lonzo was shooting open catch and shoot jumpers. Luka is shooting step back contested threes off the ball. So if you just look at percentage wise, Lonzo is a better shooter. But who would you rather have as your shooter? And so I think with Elijah Hughes, his percentage is like 34%. But I think because he's a scorer, he took a lot of contested into the shot clock threes as opposed to someone feeding him the ball or, getting wide open looks. So that's why I think that his percentage is it can rise because he may not have to take the same shots in the NBA.
Because he was a primary source of the offense for Syracuse.
Yeah, he's definitely a scorer for sure.
So who do you have at number 6 for the countdown right now for the top 10 shooting guards in the NBA draft?
Number 6 is a guy that he's kind of like CJ Ellaby, that I thought would have his sophomore year wasn't as good as his freshman year, but I really like him as a shooter. And I think we've talked about him before, but Isaiah Joe out of Arkansas. Quick trigger. He shot 41% from 3 as a freshman. It went down to about 34% this year. Very skinny. I mean, he's like listed at 6'5", 180, so he'll definitely need to bulk up. but he's a guy that I think that has his game fits the modern NBA. He gets a lot of steals, so I think Hollinger would like him. And he can shoot off the ball. As far as like on movement, you can put him in screens, catch and shoot. And he's a guy that I really like. Again, I'm buying stock in his shooting long term. I think he just had an off year shooting this year. And
was his volume a lot more? Because I would assume it'd be a more. I don't know how much more though. I'm not looking at his stats directly.
Well, as a freshman, it was 41%. This year, he actually played less. No, he played more minutes this year. As far as like minutes per game. But I want to say it was a new coach.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, it was a new coach. So actually, it was. I can't think of his name right now off the top of my head. The coach at Nevada, he used to coach in the NBA.
Oh, Musselman.
Musselman, yep. Yeah, he attempted 10 threes a game this year. Okay. So he shot 34% on 10 threes a game as a freshman. Yeah, he attempted 8, but he's a specialist, and he has a role. He knows his role. And I think last year, I'm looking at the numbers, last year he took his freshman year, he took 10.5 shots a game, 8 were threes. This year he took around 14 shots a game and 10 were threes. So I guess they're similar, but he just did not shoot the ball as well. And another reason is because he was on everybody's scouting report this year, I believe. As a freshman, he also had Daniel Gafford his freshman year, who commanded, attention as a roller. I just think this year he was on everybody's scouting report. You can't give him any looks because he'll make it. But I think that, like I said, I believe that his long-term role as a shooter, I think he's going to be an effective high 30s, 40% shooter in the NBA.
All right. The only reason I'm saying those questions, because I'm asking those questions, hopefully that a lot of these other individuals that are scouting and looking at them out there and looking at him and seeing is making sure that he might be somebody of interest. And you're right. It looks like since he's got onto the team at Arkansas, both in his freshman and sophomore year, it looks like he's been used to a high volume of threes. So it's kind of concerning when that goes so dramatically down. There was something that went maybe a different style offense. Like you said, Musselman came over, Daniel Gafford left. There's those varying factors that created that. But when you have that type of percentage less, and I know we're focusing on the 3-point areas, but I know he's probably got some other skills that interest you as well.
Yeah, but I like him as a defender. I think he has a similar body style or body type as Terrence Ferguson. He's not as athletic as Terrence, but not a lot of people are. But Terrence doesn't always show his athleticism in games. It doesn't necessarily translate on the floor. But as far as like a guy that can like navigate around screens, sometimes being skinny is good because if you're chasing guys around screens or you can slide through the screens and he's a guy that I like his potential as a defender, especially because he's good in the passing lanes. And but like I said, he has a specific skill set that that what you're going to get out from him every night. That he's a threat, and that the gravity that he'll provide on the floor.
And like you said, he's used to a heavy stream of passes headed his way at the 3-point area, rather than someone who might have some good stats in college, but has only taken like 1 or 2 or 3 shots a game from the 3-point area. He's used to going ahead time and time again, shooting from that 3-point area that a lot of other players may not have that type of experience. When you're shooting 40% or when even you're shooting 35 to 40% from the 3 area, and you're shooting at a high volume, that to me is much more intriguing than someone who shoots it maybe once or twice a game from the 3-point area and makes at 40, 45%, because you can see that they're used to that kind of volume.
Yeah, his role in college will be his role in the NBA. And so I think that's important is that there's not going to be any adjustments of how he plays as far on the offensive end between NBA and college. Now, he may not get 10 3-point attempts a game, but you never know the way the NBA is going.
Exactly. We'll be back with more of the Lakers Fast Break podcast. Needing an edge for your fantasy football team? Listen to the guys at Inside Sports Fantasy Football for insight that will help you reach your league championship. That's Inside Sports Fantasy Football. Check it out today on your favorite podcast outlet. So who do you have in the top 5 as our top 5 starts right now with number 5 for the top 10 shooting guards headed to the NBA draft?
Number 5, I have Desmond Bane. Now, he's one of the best shooters in all of college basketball. He's been consistent throughout his career. I mean, just looking at his numbers, 3 out of the 4 years he was at TCU, he shot over 40% from 3. And even as a freshman, his worst year was 38% from 3. So he definitely has a translatable role. He took about 6 threes a game this year and shot 44% from 3. He's kind of stiff. He's not much of a creator off the ball, but he has a strong frame. He rebounds well. He can, make passes. He averages about 4 assists a game playing off the ball. He's older, so I think that kind of hurts him a little bit. And, like we said, 2 or 3 times in this particular podcast, that the older you are, the more your game is critiqued, and the more teams probably figure that you don't have much upside. But he's definitely a guy who I could see falling to one of these teams that are really good, that will be possibly at the end of the first round. And you look at your teams at the end of the first round, it's your Lakers, your Bucks, those teams, and he can come in right away, play his role, and he complements a LeBron or Giannis or any star because he's a knockdown shooter.
There you
and
go.
Experience. So you don't necessarily have to. I mean, I don't know. Only in basketball is 21 or 22 considered old, but I think that he's a guy
that in esports, my friend. That in esports.
Oh yeah, definitely esports. But he's a guy that like I said, he knows his role, and he'll come in and play it on the NBA team, and he's probably more likely to come in and contribute right away on a good team because you're not necessarily banking on upside.
Well, there you go. That's number 5 right there for you. Who do you have at number 4? Who's looking good at number 4 for you at this point in time?
Number 4 is a guy that we've talked about on a previous podcast, Skylar Mays. I really like Skylar because I think that he can play between the 1 and the 2, but I think he has an advantage at the 2 because if he's paired with another point guard or a primary ball handler, he does have some point guard skills to where he can be a secondary playmaker on the court, and then he can also play off the ball. And I've known Skylar since maybe like his going into his senior year in high school. If you look at him, he doesn't look athletic, but he's very sneaky athletic. And he'll catch a lot of people by surprise when he goes to the lane, but he's really smooth. He's older, and he's a guy that I think can also come in and contribute right away. He may not have the high upside as some of the guys that, ahead of him on my list, but I do think that he can come in and contribute.
Number 3, you were going out to the top 3 right there for you. So these are the ones that are expected to go really high in the NBA draft because obviously the focus now is more about the wings. Focus is more on the guard play here in the NBA. I mean, James Wiseman we've talked about as far as centers with Onyeka Okongwu, maybe the only other center besides him or big man that could be picked in that realm. So it's going to be all guards, all going to be all wings. So at this point in time, we're now really getting high up there. Who is your number 3 pick so far right now? Looking at it right now of shooting guards headed to the NBA draft.
Number 3, I have a fellow, he's a Texas guy. I live in the Dallas area, so he's a guy that I've had a chance to see in high school. Jamias Ramsey. He actually surprised me a lot. I knew that he was a very competitive, athletic. I knew he played with a toughness, and he played all over the floor as a defender. But what I did not expect is for him to shoot the ball as well as he did his freshman year. I know he missed some games with injuries, but he shot over 42% from three, and he's just a guy that's tough. He took about 5 threes a game, so the 42% on 5 threes a game is legitimate. I was actually, like I said, I was surprised. I just did not think that he would come in and shoot as well as he did. But another reason why I may have been surprised is because he's not a good free throw shooter. So I think this year he shot below 65% from three. So you have to wonder which is which.
You mean from the free throw line?
Yeah, from the free throw line. Is the free throw shooting a true indicator of his shooting, or is it the three-point shooting where he shot, like I said, 42% on 5 attempts a game? That's the ultimate question. Was it something that was sustainable? Is he really that good of a three-point shooter? But on paper, he is. But I think that he brings a little bit more to the table than just his outside shooting. He rebounds for a guard. He's a good wing shot blocker, and I think that's pretty important. That's something that I think is valuable to NBA scouts, especially if you're looking for switchable defenders. He's only about 6'4", so he may be considered undersized for a shooting guard.
And that's something I wanted to ask you. I mean, could that be a little bit undersized? I mean, 6'4" 10 years ago would have been just fine for shooting guards, but right now we're talking about players as tall as 6'9", becoming shooting guards that are right now playing in the NBA, or as we're looking at as far as prospects for the NBA draft. Is 6'4" something that's going to be a problem for him?
For him, I don't think so, because I think he makes up for it with his effort and toughness. He averages almost a steal and a block a game at 6'4", and he plays hard. He's an effort guy. And so I think you can make up for your lack of height. I don't have his wingspan off the top of my head, but I think in today's NBA, and maybe even maybe in the past, but I feel like it's more discussed today. But I think it's more important how long your arms are than how tall you are. So if you're 6'4" with a 6'4" wingspan, I think that may work against you. But if you're 6'4" with a 6'7" wingspan, I think that helps you more than being 6. I think that helps you out if you're only 6'4".
Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, yes, his three-point shooting obviously was very effective in college basketball at just under 43%. But when I ask you, his true shooting percentage doesn't seem to pan out very well because, like you said, actually mediocre at best free throw shooting, plus also two-point free field goal shooting is not that impressive. So that's what I would say as far as if you're saying all the good things that he has, maybe I'd say some of the drawbacks or concerns that I would have if I'm a GM or whatnot. The same, his overall percentage as far as from the 2-point area is not that great. Is that something of a concern? Is that something maybe about shot selection, the way the team is structured as far as offense? You and I both know Texas Tech, especially when they were going into the Final Four in recent times, it's not that high octane offense at all. But is that a problem as far as going forward, or do you think he can develop the short game as well as he has from the 3-point area?
That's the $1 million question. I think one of the reasons why his 2-point field goal percentage is so low is because he has a tendency to play out of control, and he kind of plays a little wild. But the same aggressiveness that he shows on the offensive end with his shot selection also translates to him being, I think, a plus defender, because he's such a high motor, high energy guy, and he's so competitive that it kind of balances out a little bit. I think with a little bit of training and development, the right system around him, he'll start taking better shots. And I think he needs to work on finishing off 1 foot. I think because he's such a 2-foot finisher, sometimes when he's around the basket, he that split second between jumping off 2 is the difference between a contested layup and an open layup. And so I think because he likes to finish off 2 and he's not as explosive off 1, it causes him to miss a lot of shots at the rim. which is something that I felt like Donovan Mitchell had the same issue coming into the NBA, was he wasn't a good finisher off one, but then he developed. I mean, between his last year at Louisville and his first year at in Utah, I feel like the biggest difference between his game was he became such a better finisher, a more craftier finisher around the rim, because he was able to jump off 1 foot and added a different package of layups and shots around the rim. And so I think if Jemias has a similar development, I think that it will help his overall field goal percentage and true shooting percentage.
I was looking up the stats for him, and I'm seeing on several different draft boards, he has not risen up as highly as you think of him. Because I thought right now shooting guard is something that maybe you're talking about the lottery, you're talking about right in that 15-20 range as far as when you're talking about the number 3 pick, in number 3 shooting guard in the NBA draft, you're thinking that he's going to go right somewhere in the lottery, late lottery, maybe even the 20s. And I see him, and I've looked at that's what I was doing, was looking at the different draft boards for him and his status. I looked on 5 real quick, and at all 5, it has him right at that edge, that fringe of the first and second round. So what do you see in him that you think others may not?
Well, no, I actually agree with that as the fringe late first round. I think the reason why mine comes out a little different is because I had Josh Green as a small forward. I had a couple guys listed as 3s instead of 2s.
Okay.
And so I probably threw my list off. But I do have him as a guy that is, I think he can go between 20 and 35.
Okay. All right. That's what I wanted to ask to make sure, because when you have that and you see that as far as your projections, I thought it was like a little bit of a difference there. But I'm looking at it, and if he can develop that 2-point game, and you're right, have better choices and shot selection, I think he can go and sneak somewhere onto the back end of the lottery, or maybe somewhere in the early 20s and be a good pickup. Can he play a little bit of the point? Because some of these sites are actually projecting him as a kind of like a tweener between a point and a shooting guard.
I don't think so. I think he's a high turnover guy. I think that at least right now in his career, I don't see him as a guy who I would like to initiate the offense. I think maybe a secondary playmaker. And I mean, the comparison I have for him, and it could be a lazy comparison because they're both guys from the Dallas area, but I think a Marcus Smart type player is someone who I project him to be like. So he can, you may have him as, Marcus Smart doesn't have a position. He's not a 1, he's not a 2. He's just a basketball player. He may be in the lineup as the 1, but he may be defending the 4. So I think Ramsey is just one of these positionless basketball players that you can't really define him by a position, but I think that it may be natural to think like, oh, okay, well, at 6'4", he could probably steal some minutes at the point, but I just can't imagine a situation now where a team would throw him out, have him at the point, and him being a better decision maker than somebody that they already have on the roster.
Fair enough. We're down to our final 2, my friend. So number 2, shooting guard, who you think is going to be at the top of everybody's list for shooting guards at the NBA draft?
It's another Texas guy. It's a guy who I've had a chance to watch in high school also, and it's R.J. Hampton. R.J. is kind of similar as far as you can't really define him by a position. I think someone's going to try to turn him into a point. And
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, so – but I think he's best as a secondary playmaker. I think as far as passing, he makes good decisions. He can find the roll man. He does a good job of getting into the paint and throwing skip passes to the corner, which can lead to open shots or hockey assists. But I think that he's best suited as a guy that can come in and play a little point for you in a pinch. But if you pair him with another point guard, then you have 2 guys that can run pick and rolls, 2 guys that can make passes. So I think his best position long term is as a kind of like a combo guard.
His assist to turnover ratio in the Australian Basketball League was pretty good from what I was able to read up on him.
Yeah, it was pretty good, especially considering the fact that he had to make such an adjustment to his game because he played with some pretty big-time scorers over there. And he just had to really adjust. I mean, like I said, I saw him in high school, and he was a dominant high school player. He could get to the free throw line 10 times a game. He could score 40 points. He was bigger, stronger, faster, more athletic than everyone. And I think that playing in Australia, it was the first time that he wasn't the best player on the court. It was the first time that he had to fit around guys. And I thought that he made a good adjustment. And I honestly didn't know what position he was before he went to Australia. I just felt like, man, this kid can score the basketball. He may not be that good of a shooter, but there's nobody who's fast enough or big enough to stop him in high school from getting to the rim. Either he's going to score at the rim or he's going to get to the free throw line. And so I felt like he was able to show that he can make passes, that he can play off the ball, and that he doesn't need to have the ball in his hands every play to be effective. So he's actually risen in my eyes.
Well, there you go. I think he's going to be a really solid player in the NBA. I don't think he provides a lot of flash. What I do think is that he can be a winning player. I have this feeling. It's just my gut feeling from what I've seen on your videos, on your site, NBA Draft Junkies, on YouTube, and what I've seen as far as actually read your article when you went to go out to Australia to go ahead and see him in person. Mm-hmm. And just the things I've been reading up on and listening, I really think he's going to be a solid contributor to an NBA team. And I'm not talking about on a bad NBA team. I think he could be a solid key positional piece as far as a complementary player on a winning basketball team.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I have him. And I actually talked to his dad. I mean, we kind of run in the same circles a little bit. So I saw him last week, and he's gained weight. He's gotten stronger. He looks like a wing. Like if you see him, he looks like, if you had to just look at his body type and guess what position he is, he looks like he's a 3. But the thing that I like about him is he's very competitive. But I think, and I talked to his dad about it, and his dad was asking me why'd I have him going to the Spurs on my mock. And I said, I just think that he plays that type of winning basketball. He's not a guy that if you put him on a bad team, he's going to go out and get a lot of empty stats. I just think that the way that he plays and the way that, his competitive fires, that he wants to win. He's not about putting up big empty numbers. And I just think like going to a team like San Antonio, and I think they need to rebuild for one, but I think that he could come in and possibly contribute there just because I don't feel like the offense that they've been running the last few years is a typical Popovich offense because they got isolation players and guys that like to score in the mid-range. But I think he's a guy with his first step and his speed, he can get into the paint off pick and rolls. And then once he gets in the paint, he does a good job of making that skip pass that the Spurs love, which, it always ends up turning into hockey assists. So I think he's a Spurs guy. It's just a matter of will he be there in the Spurs draft, and they have so many guards. But in my opinion, I feel like the Spurs are going to make some changes. They're going to rebuild, and they're going to get back to playing the basketball that they want to play as far as their offense. I think they were just kind of had their hands tied when they added DeMar because he's not really a Popovich guy, in my opinion.
I agree with you on that. I think those, there's going to be eventually an end to those 15 to 20-foot jumpers that statistically will drive analysts and numbers guys absolutely nuts. But the DeMar DeRozans and LaMarcus Aldridge shooting all those 2-point jumpers, that may eventually become a thing of the past, and I think it'll be sooner rather than later. And you're right, they're going to have with the guards. Yes, they have a lot of guards there, but do they all fit with each other? And that could be a thing where they realize that. So maybe you might see some movement there, and that would open up for a player like R.J. Hampton, who, again, like I said, could be very much, from what I'm seeing, a winning player on a winning team.
I agree. And I think with the Spurs, I'm not a guy that's totally against the mid-range shot, but I feel like you can't have your best two players. That's where they want the ball at, and that's their favorite shot. And you can even make a case and say maybe their best three players because Rudy Gay is a guy that likes the mid-range pull-up also.
And that's sad to see because Rudy Gay has developed that three-point area to the point where he became, I think last year, or that wasn't this year, but last year was one of the statistically the best three-point shooters in the league. So imagine that.
Yeah. But I think if I'm not mistaken, the Spurs they shot a good percentage from three, but they
just don't shoot it much.
Yeah, which is really weird because, a few years ago, they were able to beat teams because they had stretch fours and fives that could spread the floor, and they played a European-style basketball. And now it's like they went back to the 90s.
Should have learned from when Ray Allen beat them in Miami, but, I digress. So, all right, we're down to our last one, my friend. The top player right now at shooting guard that you think will be headed to the NBA draft.
This is probably the easiest prediction. Anthony Edwards is my number one shooting guard on the list. I think that he may be able to play a little bit of one down the line once he's in his prime. Maybe not full-time, but I do think that he does have some of the passing instincts. But he just passes the eye test, like how he moves, and just like how he handles the ball, his athleticism, his size, his strength, everything that you kind of look for in a modern day NBA combo guard, shooting guard. I think he has all of it as far as the physical tools.
But
yeah, the question I have about him is, I think he needs to improve as a shooter, which is obvious. He's more of a scorer than a shooter, but he is a guy that I believe is going to have the ball in his hands. So he may not have to shoot a lot of catch and shoot threes. I guess if there was one question I had about him is his shot selection. He settles for a lot of pull-up jumpers when I think that he has the skills and the body to be able to get to the free throw line and just attack. So as long as he just kind of continues to develop and grow and just become more aggressive of a scorer, then I think the sky's the limit for him.
Well, one of the things I've been doing a lot of research about him that I'm seeing a lot of feedback on is the fact that on talent, he's probably the number one player in the NBA draft. Mm-hmm. But desire, and maybe I've also heard the term feel for the game and court awareness, because he did pick it up, the basketball game, a little bit later. I think he was playing football before for a great part of his younger years and didn't pick it up until his freshman or sophomore year in high school. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, he might still have more time to develop and needed development there. But I think a lot of people are doing comparisons to him and Andrew Wiggins, which is not at this point in time very favorable.
Yeah, that's a comparison that I think I made on the video that I have with my brother. But then I think you can say the same for Wiseman too, as far as guys that are like just super, super talented, but you question if they have the personality to carry a team. Like, I kind of call it that dog mentality. I think Edwards showed it in the Michigan State game, and he showed that defensively he can make an impact on both ends of the floor. And he's a shot maker. Like he can make tough shots, but I just feel like he settles for, and honestly, this could be nitpicking, because if you look at his stats, he got to the free throw line around 4 or 5 times a game, which is pretty good. But I still feel like there could be more. Like he just had too many possessions where he dribbled, shot a pull-up, contested jumper, as opposed to just attacking. And maybe that'll change with NBA as far as spacing. The lane won't be as congested. But the sky is the limit for this guy. He can handle the ball. He can score on his man one-on-one. He's athletic. He can finish at the rim. It's just a little bit of, intangible things that you may have questions about. But also, he's so young. Like, I think he reclassified, if I'm not mistaken. So he could easily be a senior in high school.
That's true. But that's like I said, there's still a lot more development that could be had because football was his original target goal, and he switched over to basketball because he realized he could probably make a longer and better career out of basketball. I just worry when somebody tells me or has any comparisons to Andrew Wiggins, and it's not because of necessarily 100% out of talent. It's some of the other intangibles that are there. That kind of scares me. And as a team, that would kind of scare me also.
Yeah, and I think that I can see the comparisons a little bit. I think that, I mean, if you look at the Michigan State game, like I mentioned earlier, I don't think Wiggins had a game of that caliber in college where he just took over. And I feel like people wanted to see more of that from him. I think that was a teaser. So I think that game may have helped him a lot, but it also may have made people say, like, can you bring this every night? And I think that's what has led to some of the questions. But also, I mean, I read the stories about him being a football player. And so I think that's also what makes people want a little more, because he may not have the football player mentality that you think about when you think of a former football player. Because a lot of times when I think of a former football player that switched to basketball, I think of this really aggressive person that enjoys physical contact and they're seeking contact. While he has the body type to do it, but he just settles for jumpers. Way too many mid-range pull-up jumpers.
That's something he's going to have to work on. I think the talent is there. Like I said, I'm just concerned if the desire and the heart is going to be there along with it. I think a lot of people are asking those same questions as well. And he could very well go number one in the NBA draft, but then he could fall because of those same issues as well.
Yeah, I really don't see him falling too far. But, I mean, I think with this draft, it's such a crapshoot because the teams that are picking in the draft, it may not – I mean, like, for example, if Cleveland has the number one pick, do they take another guard? If Golden State has the number one pick, do they take another guard? I mean, because they already have Steph, Clay, and Wiggins at the 3. Atlanta, that's his hometown. They may take him, even though they already have drafted a 2 or a 3 within the last few drafts. So I think if he falls, it may be because of fit, but I think everybody is high on his upside.
Well, there you have it. That's the top 10 shooting guards in the NBA draft as told to me, and that's actually a pretty darn good list, by Mr. Rafael Barlowe from NBA Draft Junkies. Before we head on out, my friend, I know it's been a little bit of a longer episode, so I thank you for sticking out with me and hanging out as we tackled a lot of subjects, including the top 10 shooting guards in the NBA draft. But it's always such a great conversation with you. Just can't help it. Always talking basketball with you. But before we head on out, people have got to be informed on exactly what's going on with your awesome experience known as NBA Draft Junkies.
It's the same, just working, trying to put out content. I have some plans that I want to start in June 1st is my target date, but I definitely want to, just kind of make my channel and make my content better. So that's something that I'm working on. But between then, I will just keep putting out videos. I just made another Killian Hayes video where I broke down his offensive strengths and areas for improvement. I should have, by the time this podcast comes out, have one with Cole Anthony. And then I'm just going to work my way down the list. And what I'm doing that may be a little bit different, or maybe it's another guy or two that may be doing it, but I'm breaking down the videos into 2. Each player will have an offensive strengths video and another video with the areas of improvement. But during the video, instead of just putting the clips on there and having like a little message that says, good 3-point shooter, I'm actually talking through the video and explaining what I see. And so that takes a little bit more time, but I just, I want my channel to be the best. I want my channel to be the channel that if you're into the draft, if you're a draft junkie, that you go to and find out the information of the player that your team may draft or a player that you like. So I'm trying to put in a little bit more work in instead of just doing what I had did in the past, which is just make a video and of their offensive strengths and just kind of put stats out there. So trying to do a little bit more. So the content I won't be able to put out 5 or 6 videos a week, individual videos a week, but instead I have a more deeper analysis.
Well, there you go. And you can find that at NBA Draft Junkies. That's on YouTube. Please subscribe and like his videos today, like I have. And then also you can go to his great site for his not only his mock draft, but great articles and so much more at NBADraftJunkies.com. Well, my friend, speaking of Killian Hayes and also Cole Anthony, the next time we speak, we're going to be discussing some point guard action here because the point guards are the last position on our list as far as the top 10 prospects in the NBA draft. I'm looking forward to that one. And I've been on your Twitter at Barlow500 and also at NBA Draft Junkies. And you've been saying a lot of things about Cole Anthony lately that you and I were going to have to talk about on our next episode.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going through the process of watching guys for the second time. And you can see like the improvements that they've made between the start of the season and the first, few games where I watched their videos and now that the season is over. So my thought process is changing, and there will be guys that are, will move up or down on my draft board based off of what I saw in my second wave of watching film. So Cole Anthony is a guy that you can just stay tuned to see if he's went up or if he's went down.
Well, it's going to be interesting to talk about because the point guards are always a point, pardon the pun there, a point of contention right here coming up right on the Lakers Fast Break. Something I know the Lakers will be definitely looking at because there's obviously a need there after LeBron James for a point guard if they do decide to keep their draft coming up. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation coming up in the top 10 point guards headed to the NBA draft coming up very soon right here at the Lakers Fast Break. If you like what we do, please give us that 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you can go ahead and review podcasts on your podcast channel. We're available everywhere you get your podcasts, so we cannot thank you enough for listening. If you have any questions for me or questions I could pass along to Rafael, please, you can go ahead at Lakers Fast Break on Twitter or LakersFastBreak@yahoo.com. Well, Rafael, it's been great talking to you one more time. We could just go ahead all day long and talk basketball, my gosh, to just clog up the internet with all of our talk on NBA, all the different facets, both back in the past, now in the present, and upcoming in the future. Always a great conversation with you right here at the Lakers Fast Break Podcast.